Empathy can feel like a gift, a light in a dark room, a bridge between souls. But what no one tells you, what too few ever say aloud, is that empathy can also be a slow kind of death, not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet. You begin to disappear, one feeling at a time. You don't collapse in the middle of the room. You collapse while smiling, while nodding, while texting someone back at 2 a.m. to say, "It's okay, I'm here, talk to me." Even when you're exhausted, even when you've already bled yourself dry that day, that's what no one sees. You're the one who notices the subtext in someone's tone and takes it home with you. You're the one who feels someone's anger before they even realize they're angry. You walk into a room and your body tenses, not because of what's been said, but because of what's being felt beneath the surface. You carry atmospheres, you carry secrets, you carry sorrow that was never yours to begin with. And somewhere along the way you stopped asking why. Carl Jung warned of this, not in the language of social media, but in the language of the soul. He said that when we fail to individuate, when we fail to become a whole sovereign self, we fragment, we absorb everything and own nothing. We become containers for other people's chaos, convinced that to feel deeply is to be good. But feeling everything doesn't make you good. It makes you disappear. There's a life paradox no one teaches. The more you over-identify with others' pain, the more likely you are to abandon your own. And an abandoned self eventually becomes a resentful one, but you don't express that resentment, not directly. That's not how you were taught. You were taught to be available, to be kind, to be strong. You were rewarded for disappearing, praised for being the one who always understands. So you keep saying yes, even when your nervous system is screaming no. You keep absorbing the energy in the room, even when it leaves you shaking afterward. You keep performing the role of emotional savior, even as your own emotions starve for air. Francis Weller wrote, "The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them." But most empaths carry grief in both hands, their own and everyone else's, and they call it love. But that's not love, that's burnout in slow motion. Love doesn't require you to bleed for everyone who aches. Love does not ask you to disappear in order to be worthy, and yet here you are. You've become the emotional first responder in every crisis, the secret therapist at every dinner table, the one who always listens, even when no one asks how you are. And the worst part, you've started to believe this is normal. You've forgotten what it feels like to wake up without dread, to walk into a room without scanning it for emotional danger, to breathe without anticipating the next request, to hold space, absorb tension, calm a storm. There's a cost to this, and the currency is you. You were never meant to feel everything. You were never built to carry the emotional residue of every room, every conversation, every silent cry between the lines. You were made to feel deeply, yes, but also to feel wisely, to feel selectively, to feel with boundaries. Because without boundaries, empathy is not a gift, it's a trap that tells you you're only good when you're suffering. A trap that teaches you to be loyal to other people's pain, but disloyal to your own needs. A trap that demands your sensitivity in full, but offers no protection in return. And the truth is, this isn't sustainable, not emotionally, not physically, not spiritually. So here's the shift. You don't need to stop caring. You need to stop caring indiscriminately. You need to stop mistaking over-functioning for compassion. You need to stop calling it love when it's actually self-erasure. Because empathy without a self is just an open wound, and wounds that are never tended do not heal. They infect, they resent, they rot. You're not here to carry the world. You're here to carry yourself fully, fiercely, and with reverence. And from that place, you offer what overflows, not what bleeds. And if that means saying no, if that means stepping back, if that means disappointing someone who has built their comfort on your silence, so be it. Because the most loving act you can do, starting now, is to stop offering your nervous system as a donation to every unregulated person you meet. You do not need to feel everything to be worthy. You just need to feel what's yours. There's a story not many people know, a quiet parable passed down through spiritual teachers. It begins with a snake. The snake lived at the edge of a village. It hissed, it struck, people feared it, and because of that, they respected it. Then one day, a wandering monk told the snake, "You don't need to hurt others to be at peace. Let go of aggression, be gentle." The snake, moved by the monk's wisdom, agreed. It stopped biting, it coiled quietly near the village path. And the villagers noticed, but they didn't respond with gratitude, they responded with opportunity. Children threw rocks, people mocked it, someone dragged it by the tail. The snake, obedient to peace, said nothing, and so it suffered. When the monk returned and saw the snake beaten and weak, he asked, "What happened to you?" The snake whispered, "You told me not to bite." The monk said, "Yes, but I did not tell you not to hiss." That distinction might save your life. Because too many empaths have been taught the same half lesson. You were told that to be kind meant to be silent, that to be loving meant to be endlessly available, that to be good meant to have no edge, no voice, no line that says, "This is where I end and you begin." So you stopped hissing. And the world, like the village, took advantage of your quiet. You became the friend who never says no, the partner who always forgives, the employee who absorbs every emotional undercurrent in the office and then cries alone in the car. And the world applauded your generosity, but what it actually loved was your compliance. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide to survive. For empaths, the shadow is not hatred or selfishness, it's strength, boundaries, assertiveness, the holy hiss, and without that hiss, your empathy becomes exploitation. Here's the paradox. Your anger isn't what makes you dangerous. Your silence is, because silence becomes the breeding ground for resentment, and resentment, left unspoken, eventually turns inward. It becomes fatigue, fibromyalgia, panic attacks, insomnia, emotional numbness. It wears 1,000 faces, but its root is always the same. You didn't hiss when you should have. You didn't say stop. You didn't protect the part of you that gives, so now you have nothing left to give. And you wonder why your kindness feels like sand in your mouth. Anger is not the enemy. In fact, anger is the boundary's first language. It's the part of you that rises and says, "No more." It doesn't need to destroy. It only needs to be heard. Carla McLaren calls anger the guardian of our boundaries, not the destroyer, the guardian. And yet most empaths were taught to exile their anger at a young age. So it stays underground. It seeps through the cracks. It poisons the well, not because it's evil, but because it was never allowed to breathe. But what if you let it breathe? What if you let it speak, not to punish others, but to protect yourself? What if your hiss became a hymn? The sound of your inner ecosystem protecting its sacred balance. What if you could say, "I'm not available tonight. I can't carry this for you. I love you, but I won't abandon myself to save you." Because the truth is, boundaries aren't a rejection of love. They are its structure. They are what allow love to be chosen, not extracted. What allow your yes to mean something, because now it's no longer coming from fear. It's coming from freedom. So the next time someone comes too close, drains too much, or mistakes your softness for surrender, hiss. Don't bite, don't scream, just hiss. And let the sound say all that your silence never did. "I'm here, I care, but I will not be consumed." There's a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from becoming too much for too many. The exhaustion of molding yourself into what someone else needs before they even ask. Of mirroring someone's pain so completely you forget what your own reflection looks like. That's not empathy. That's erasure. And this is the part most empaths never talk about. You become the echo in the room, the one who listens too well, feels too much, adjusts too fast. You watch people fall apart and become the one who holds it all. But in the process, you forget what it's like to be held. You forget that your needs matter too. Carl Jung warned us that when we over-identify with the persona, the socially approved mask, we begin to fracture. And for the empath, the mask is empathy itself, the healer, the saint, the one who always understands. But the longer you perform that role without boundaries, the more disconnected you become from your own center, and at some point you stop performing empathy and start bleeding it. You don't just understand others, you dissolve into them. This is the shadow Jung spoke of. Not evil, not pathology, just the parts of yourself you had to exile to stay loved. And if you are an empath, chances are you buried your anger. You silenced your needs, you blurred your edges, not because you wanted to, but because the people around you needed you soft, selfless, and easily shaped. And it worked. Until it didn't. Until the resentment started to seep in, quietly, subtly, in the sigh you let out after every phone call, in the numbness that follows being so helpful, in the ache you feel when you smile and say, of course, when what you mean is, I don't have the capacity for this. Francis Weller once said, when we carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, we are stretched large by life. But when you carry only others' grief in both hands, your own soul begins to disappear under the weight. There is a myth that captures this. Echo and Narcissus. Echo, cursed to repeat only the words of others, falls in love with a boy who loves only himself. She follows him, admires him, echoes his voice, hoping to be heard. But she never is, and in the end she withers, until there's nothing left of her but the sound of someone else's words. That's what happens when your empathy becomes repetition, when you mirror someone's suffering so completely that you forget to name your own. This is not compassion, it's emotional mimicry, and no matter how noble it looks, it leaves you empty. Paul Bloom argued that empathy can be dangerous, that over-identifying with another's pain can lead to poor moral decisions, burnout, and bias. And he's right, because empathy without boundaries doesn't make you more loving. It makes you vulnerable to being used, drained, and forgotten. There's a paradox in the heart of the empath's suffering. The more you disappear to be what someone else needs, the less they see you at all. You become a mirror, and mirrors don't get thanked. They get stared into and then walked away from. You need to stop being a mirror. You need to become a person again. That means naming your needs out loud. That means honoring your own emotional truth, even when it contradicts the script you've always performed. It means risking the discomfort of being seen in your wholeness, not just your usefulness. You are not here to echo other people's lives. You are here to live yours, and yes, it's terrifying. It means people might stop relying on you. It means they might stop seeing you as the strong one. It means disappointing those who have depended on your silence. But that's the risk you take when you stop reflecting and start existing. When you reclaim your voice, when you say, I can't help you today, and mean it. When you say, that doesn't feel right, and trust it. When you look in the mirror and don't flinch, because for the first time what you see isn't someone else's sadness, it's you, fully present, fully visible, and finally real. There's a moment in every empath's journey when the pain becomes too familiar to be dismissed and too costly to keep calling love. A moment when you stop asking, what do they need from me? And start asking, what do I need to feel whole again? This is not the end. This is alchemy, the shift from emotional absorption to conscious compassion, from martyrdom to mastery, from being drained by your gift to being sustained by it. Carl Jung didn't believe healing was about light alone. He said one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And for the empath, the darkness is not cruelty. It's the buried self, the part that learned to be loved by disappearing. But what if your healing isn't in giving more? What if it's in giving less, but giving it with presence? not panic. Matt Licata calls this the inner holding environment, a space within where you can sit with your truth and let it breathe, where your emotions are not a burden but a message, where you stop managing other people's storms and start listening to the forecast in your own soul. The world will tell you that taking space is selfish, that not answering every late-night text is rude, that not carrying someone else's pain means you don't care. But that's not love. That's emotional labor without reciprocity. That's spiritual codependency. Pixie Lighthorse teaches that boundaries are not barriers, they are prayer lines. They are the sacred edges of our capacity. Without them, empathy isn't sacred, it's chaotic. It becomes a wildfire burning through your body, your time, your spirit. But with boundaries, empathy becomes art. Something you sculpt, something you place with care, something you offer when your hands are full of light, not when they're bleeding. Carla McLaren reminds us that empathy is not a binary switch. It's a dial. You can turn it up when someone truly needs you, and turn it down when your body tells you you're slipping into the abyss. That's not avoidance, that's intelligence. That's what self-trust sounds like. It says, I'm not abandoning you, I'm anchoring me. There's a moment, not dramatic but sacred, when you begin to choose yourself, not as a rejection of others, but as a reclamation of what's been lost. You stop absorbing, you start discerning, you stop apologizing for needing rest, solitude, silence, you stop performing empathy and start practicing presence. And you start to notice something strange. You become more loving, not less, more grounded, more honest, more radiant. You still show up, but now with discernment, not obligation. You still hold space, but now from overflow, not depletion. You still feel, but now with filters, not with open wounds. This is the alchemy. Not to stop feeling, but to feel wisely. Not to close your heart, but to give it a gate. Not to be less sensitive, but to become fiercely selective with your attention. You're not here to be everything to everyone. You're here to be something specific to someone and everything to yourself. That is the transformation. That is the moment you stop being the empath who collapses and become the one who creates, the one who radiates from a place of fullness, the one who gives but no longer disappears, the one who shines without needing to burn. There's a kind of love that doesn't demand your disappearance, a kind of connection that lets you breathe, a kind of closeness that doesn't cost you your center. But most empaths have never known it because for so long you believed love meant losing yourself. You thought the deeper the bond, the smaller you needed to become, that if you could dissolve your needs, mute your boundaries and feel what they felt without asking for anything in return, that somehow you were loving them well. You weren't. You were disappearing in plain sight, and they were never going to stop you, because people rarely question what they benefit from. When your empathy meant they never had to face their own discomfort, they called you strong. When your silence protected their chaos, they called you understanding. When your exhaustion served their peace, they called you kind. But you were none of those things. You were just unprotected. Carl Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But if only one changes, if only one bends, adjusts, absorbs, then it's not a meeting, it's an extraction. And empathy without balance becomes just that, a slow emotional extraction performed over years disguised as devotion. And so you must relearn love, not as fusion, but as the dance between two centers. You must relearn connection as a practice of respect, not engulfment. As John O'Donohue once wrote, "May you never place walls between the light and yourself, but neither should you let others build their homes inside your nervous system. Love must not steal your edges to preserve someone else's comfort. It must hold space for your whole shape." And here's the truth. When you stop over-functioning, some people will leave. Not because you failed them, but because you've stopped betraying yourself to serve them. When you introduce boundaries into relationships built on your self-erasure, those relationships may not survive. That's not a loss. That's clarity. Because love is not real when it depends on your invisibility. It becomes real the moment you can be fully present, fully seen, and still fully safe. That begins with solitude, not isolation, but sacred aloneness. The space where you remember your own rhythms, the silence where your voice returns, the stillness where you touch what's yours. And from that place, you begin to re-enter relationship, not as a mirror, but as a person. You learn to listen without absorbing. You learn to witness without fixing. You learn to stay, not because you're needed, but because you're choosing to be there. This is the empath's liberation, not from love, but into it. Because now you no longer equate love with sacrifice, you equate it with truth. You no longer feel guilty for asking, can this relationship also nourish me? You no longer believe your sensitivity makes you too much or not enough. You realize your feelings are not obstacles to connection, they are guides, warnings, invitations, gateways. And so you give differently, not from the need to be chosen, but from the joy of being whole. You begin to share your energy, not because you're empty without giving it, but because you're full enough to let it overflow. You become the kind of person who can be with others and still be with yourself. Two solitudes, one dance, a relationship that breathes, a connection that doesn't collapse, a love that does not ask you to vanish. And in that sacred movement, you reclaim the deepest truth. You were never meant to feel everything for everyone. You were meant to feel yourself completely. And in that self-feeling, real intimacy begins. Not through empathy that devours, but through empathy that discerns. Not through absorption, but through presence. Not through drowning together, but through standing side by side in the storm, saying, I won't lose myself this time, and meaning it. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the empath who has spent a lifetime bending, absorbing, and dissolving begins to remember, not just who they were before they became everyone else's shelter, but who they were always meant to be. Not a sponge, not a mirror, a light, but not the kind that burns itself out trying to warm everyone in the room, not the kind that flares up in crisis and disappears when no one's watching. This is the light of someone who has learned to burn steadily, with boundaries, with clarity, with love that does not cost them their life. Carl Jung said that only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And you've lived the paradox. You've carried everyone else's grief and called it goodness. You've mistaken depletion for devotion. You've let yourself vanish and called it virtue. But now you see it. You were never meant to be the emotional emergency exit for everyone who refuses to feel their own pain. You were never meant to carry what was never yours. You were never meant to feel everything just to prove you care. You were meant to feel what is true, what is yours, what is sacred, and nothing more. There's a Japanese tradition called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. They don't hide the cracks, they highlight them. Because the vessel is more beautiful not in spite of its fractures, but because of them. This is what healing empathy looks like. You don't become harder, you become clearer. You don't stop feeling, you start choosing. You don't deny your past. You let it shine through you like gold in the fractures, and suddenly your boundaries are no longer fences. They're architecture. They hold you upright. They give your love shape. They protect the fire inside you from every wind that wants to blow it out. There is a beauty in that fire now, because it no longer rages uncontrollably, it no longer leaps to respond to every siren call, it no longer seeks to prove its worth by how much it can burn for others. It glows, soft, steady, sacred. You love from fullness now, not performance. You show up from choice, not compulsion. You listen because you care, not because you're terrified of being unloved if you don't. And when someone tries to pull you into their chaos, you no longer jump. You pause, you breathe, you ask, is this mine to hold? And sometimes the answer is no. That no isn't rejection, it's wisdom. It's the quiet power of someone who has finally learned the difference between love and self-abandonment. And when you say it, you don't shrink. You don't apologize. You simply stand in your light and let it speak for you. Because now your presence is not a sacrifice, it's an offering. And only those who know how to receive it with care will stay. That's not loneliness, that's freedom. So if you're watching this and you spent your life as the one who feels too much, holds too much, gives too much, this is your invitation, not to feel less, but to feel differently, to feel with discernment, to feel with strength, to feel with the sacred knowledge that your light was never meant to flicker and fade just so someone else could see. It was meant to shine. Not for everyone, but for those who stand beside you and say, you don't need to disappear to be loved, and most importantly, for you. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's leakage, and empathy without a self isn't empathy, it's erosion. But this steady warmth you now carry, this is the light you were meant to be, so let it shine with care, let it shine with courage, let it shine without apology. And if you've ever lost yourself inside someone else's storm, leave a trace of your truth in the comments below. Tell the world when you started to come back. Tell us what you let go of and what you're finally reclaiming. You're not alone, not anymore.